Imagine standing before a cold, imposing barbed wire fence. On one side of the fence lies Nogales, Arizona. The average annual income is around $30,000. Children attend safe schools. The elderly have access to Medicare. Roads are smoothly paved. And most importantly, the people have the right to vote, secure property rights, and the inherent belief that if they work hard, no one can arbitrarily seize the fruits of their labor. Just a few steps away, on the other side of that fence, lies Nogales, Sonora, Mexico. They share the same sky, the same harsh desert climate. They share the same culture, the same cuisine, often even the same bloodlines and ancestors. Yet here, income is a third of that of their northern neighbors. Crime, corruption, and insecurity are daily bread. A child born here faces infant mortality rates significantly higher than a child born just meters to the north. Why? This question is not merely intellectual curiosity. It is pain. It is the righteous anger of billions living in impoverished nations. Why do I work 14 hours a day and remain poor, while others work less and live in luxury? Is it God's will? Is it genetics? Is it because we are lazy? Do you feel that helplessness, that sinking feeling that the game was rigged before you were even conceived? In 2024, the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics to three men, Daron Acemoglu, Simon Johnson, and James Robinson. They didn't invent a formula for the stock market. They don't teach you how to flip real estate. They did something far more terrifying. They unveiled the secret rules of the game of nations. They demonstrated that the poverty of a people is not an accidental tragedy. It is a design. And the most chilling part? Sometimes poverty is maintained intentionally by those in power. Are you ready to face this naked truth? Because once you see it, you will never look at the world the same way again.
Before Daron Acemoglu, Simon Johnson, and James Robinson, let's call them AJR, stepped onto the historical stage, the world had lulled itself to sleep with explanations that were convenient but wrong. We hear these prejudiced explanations everywhere, from street corners to parliamentary halls. The geography hypothesis. That country is poor because it's too hot, the people are lethargic, or they lack natural resources. The culture hypothesis. Their culture doesn't value savings or hard work. The ignorance hypothesis. Their leaders just don't know how to run an economy. If we teach them Western economics, they'll get rich. Acemoglu and his colleagues looked at these hypotheses and shook their heads. They offer you a sense of intellectual superiority by proving that all the above are fallacies. Look at Singapore, a tiny island with no resources, hot and humid year-round. Why are they rich? Look at North and South Korea, the same people, the same culture, the same geography. Why is one blazing with light at night while the other is submerged in darkness? No. It is not about temperature or resources. The AJR trio embarked on a journey through time, rewinding 500 years of colonial history to find the source code of prosperity. They are the detectives of economic history. Daron Acemoglu, a brilliant mind with a prodigious output of knowledge, who sees mathematical models hidden behind chaotic political upheavals. Simon Johnson, former chief economist at the IMF, who has witnessed devastating financial crises firsthand and understands the backstage of global power. And James Robinson, a political scientist who has spent a lifetime studying Africa and Latin America, understanding the pulse of dictatorial regimes. They came together not to write textbooks, but to answer a life-or-death question: why nations fail. Their answer lies in a single word we will dissect throughout this series: institutions. But don't let the word institutions bore you. Don't think of it as dry government buildings. Think of it as the rules of the game. In a casino, if the house always wins and the player always loses, it is because the rules of the game are designed to extract from you. Conversely, if the casino is fair, where anyone has a chance to win with skill, that is a different set of rules of the game. Their research shed light on a heartbreaking truth. For much of human history, most of us have been locked inside a rigged casino.
A bit of trivia to make this story more intriguing. Technically,
The prize AJR received in 2024 is officially titled the Sveriges Riksbank Prize in Economic Sciences in memory of Alfred Nobel. Alfred Nobel, the father of dynamite, did not mention economics in his original will. He disliked vague disciplines. But in 1968, Sweden's central bank established this prize. Although it arrived later and is often controversial, since economics is a social science harder to prove absolutely than physics, its weight is undeniable. Why was this prize awarded to AJR in 2024? Why now? Because the world is shaking. We are living in an era where the wealth gap has reached record levels. Faith in democracy is wavering. Authoritarian models are rising powerfully. Young people feel despair because no matter how hard they try, they cannot afford a home. The Nobel Committee chose AJR as a warning, or perhaps a validation of our collective fear that prosperity is not eternal. It is more fragile than you think, and it depends entirely on whether we build or destroy political institutions. Their work is not just theory. It is a mirror reflecting the very society we live in. Hold tight. In the next part, we will step into a time machine, traveling back to the moment when the destiny of nations was completely flipped. You will understand why some once wealthy lands became destitute and why barren wastelands became superpowers. The secret lies in a concept called the reversal of fortune. Let's fire up the time machine and travel back to the year 1500. If you were a venture capitalist at that time, forced to bet your entire fortune on the region that would become an economic superpower in the next 500 years, who would you choose? Undoubtedly, you would pick the Aztec Empire, modern-day Mexico, or the Inca Empire, Peru. These were dazzling civilizations, highly urbanized, with mountains of gold and silver, complex road systems, and sophisticated architecture. You would laugh in the face of anyone suggesting an investment in North America. Back then, North America was a wilderness, sparsely populated, consisting of nothing but forests and emptiness. But the reality of 2024 has slapped that prediction in the face. The places that were once the richest, the lush tropics, now belong to the group of developing or impoverished nations. Meanwhile, the historically poor and sparse lands, USA, Canada, Australia, have become the wealthiest nations on the planet. Acemoglu, Johnson, and Robinson call this the reversal of fortune. Why this irony? Their answer will make you shudder at the coldness of history. Initial wealth was a curse. When the Spanish arrived in South America, they saw gold and millions of indigenous people. Their goal was simple: exploitation. They designed a governance machine to coerce the population into working in mines and plantations, extracting resources to ship back to Europe. They had no need to care about the people's rights, for the people were merely tools. Conversely, when the English arrived in North America, for example, Jamestown, they looked for gold but found none. They too wanted to exploit indigenous labor, but the population here was too sparse and resisted fiercely. The plan to enslave failed. The English settlers were backed into a corner. No one is going to feed us, we have to work ourselves. And this is the defining moment of the modern world. To encourage settlers to work, the colonial leadership was forced to grant them rights. They were given land, the right to vote, and the right to keep the fruits of their labor. It wasn't because the English were nicer or loved democracy more than the Spanish. Not at all. It was simply a forced choice for survival. It was the initial poverty of North America that compelled them to build a society based on cooperation and individual incentive rather than coercion. The 2024 Nobel Trio named these two models of rules of the game, and these are the most crucial concepts you need to remember to understand the world. Extractive institutions. Imagine a leech or a slave owner. The purpose of these rules is to extract resources from the many
the people, to enrich a small elite, monarchs, dictators, or special interest groups. Characteristics: no real property rights, arbitrary laws. Innovation is discouraged because if you invent something good, the boss will steal it. Result: stagnant society, but an extremely wealthy elite. Inclusive institutions. Imagine a community garden. The purpose is to create a fair playing field for everyone to participate in the economy and politics. Characteristics: protection of property rights, fair laws for both boss and employee. Citizens have a voice in politics, broad educational opportunities. Result: encourages investment, technological innovation, and long-term prosperity. Why does this relate to you? Look at the company you work for. If your boss promotes employees based on talent, listens to everyone's opinions, and distributes bonuses fairly, that is an inclusive model. You will want to contribute. If the boss only promotes relatives, suppresses talented employees for fear of being usurped, and drains your labor, that is an extractive model. You will do the bare minimum or find ways to sabotage. Nations operate exactly the same way, just on a gigantic scale.
This is the genius part of Acemoglu and his colleagues' work, allowing them to defeat other theories spectacularly. They asked themselves, what determined whether European colonizers would establish extractive institutions or inclusive institutions? The answer lies in the mosquito. Yes, you heard that right. In places with harsh tropical climates, where malaria and yellow fever were rampant, like Africa, South America, Southeast Asia, the mortality rate of Europeans was extremely high. In some places, 50 to 80% of settlers died within the first year. Fearful of death, Europeans dared not settle there long term. They chose the solution, grab and run. They established a remote governance machine or sent a small group to strip resources, rubber, gold, spices, as quickly as possible, and ship them back to the motherland. They established extractive institutions. In contrast, in places with temperate climates, like the US, Australia, New Zealand, Europeans could live healthily. They brought their families. They settled permanently. And because they intended to live there for life, they demanded rights: the right to protection, the right to vote, the right to own land. They built inclusive institutions to serve themselves. AJR's data shows a shocking correlation. The mortality rate of colonial soldiers hundreds of years ago accurately predicts the wealth or poverty of that nation today. Does that give you chills? A mosquito buzzing 400 years ago might have decided the fate of the passport you hold in your hand. It decided whether you were born in a country where the police protect you or a country where you have to bribe the police. The injustice of history lies not only in guns and steel, but in biology and the cold calculations of the powerful. But the biggest question remains. Colonialism ended long ago. Why don't poor countries simply change the rules? Why don't they tear down extractive institutions to build inclusive ones? Why do we know the cure but refuse to take the medicine? The answer lies in the trap of power. It turns out poverty is very profitable. For some.
Imagine you are a king or a dictator with the power of life and death in your hands. One day, a young inventor comes to you. He brings a magical machine that can help your people work 10 times faster, creating immense wealth for the kingdom. The kingdom will prosper and tax revenues will soar. By normal logic, you would reward him heavily and implement the machine immediately, right? But history and the research of Acemoglu, Johnson, and Robinson proves the opposite. You would banish him or perhaps even behead him. Why? Why would a leader intentionally prevent their country from becoming wealthy? This is the greatest paradox that the 2024 Nobel Prize has decoded. It turns out poverty is not a failure of intelligence, but a success of power protection strategy. Do you feel a chill running down your spine? Perhaps the stagnation of your company or your city is not because the leaders don't know how, but because they dare not.
Let's go back to England in 1589. William Lee, a brilliant clergyman, invented the world's first knitting machine. It was vastly faster than hand knitting. Excited, he sought an audience with Queen Elizabeth I to request a patent. He thought he would be honored. But the queen coldly refused. "Consider thou what the invention could do to my poor subjects. It would assuredly bring to them ruin by depriving them of employment, thus making them beggars." Sounds benevolent, doesn't it? The queen caring for her people. But AJR points out the naked truth. The queen wasn't afraid of the people becoming poor. She was afraid of them becoming too idle and too independent. If machines did the work, people would have spare time. They would gather, discuss politics, and worst of all, new textile mill owners would grow rich, possessing the financial power to challenge royal authority. This concept is called the fear of creative destruction. Economic progress always comes with the destruction of the old. Tractors replace water buffaloes. Email replaces the post office. AI replaces office workers. In an inclusive institution like modern US or UK, this destruction is accepted because it brings greater common good. But in an extractive institution, like feudal or dictatorial regimes, innovation is the enemy. Innovation creates a new wealthy class, not aligned with the king. New technology makes people smarter and better connected, like the internet. Therefore, the dictator's logic is ruthless but rational. Better to rule a poor but obedient country than to rule a rich country full of people capable of overthrowing me. Your poverty is the price paid for the security of their seat.
At this point, you might ask, why don't they compromise? Why doesn't the king allow wealth creation, then tax it higher so everyone is happy? This is where game theory enters with the concept, the commitment problem. Imagine you were an entrepreneur in a dictatorship. The dictator says, "Go ahead, invest in building a factory. I promise I won't confiscate it." Do you believe him? Certainly not. Because once you have finished building the factory, sunk cost, the dictator has all the power, guns, courts, to renege on his word. You have no way to punish him. Because you know he can break his word, you decide not to invest in the first place. The dictator knows you won't invest, so he doesn't bother promising anything. The result? A complete stalemate. No investment, no production. Society becomes clinically dead. This is the tragedy of poor nations. They don't lack resources, they lack a power-binding mechanism. In rich countries, the president cannot arbitrarily seize your assets because courts, parliament, and the press stand in the way. The separation of powers is the most credible commitment.
Don't be too quick to laugh at Queen Elizabeth I or poor nations. This mechanism is happening right in the heart of modern societies, perhaps even in your own industry. Look at the big tech giants. When they lobby for strict censorship laws, are they really concerned about your information safety? Or are they creating a technical barrier to entry so that small startups cannot compete? That is the modern William Lee mindset. Those holding dominant positions, tycoons, crony interest groups, always tend to use political power to block innovation that threatens their rice bowl. They would rather stifle the industry's growth than let themselves be replaced. The stagnation of certain public projects, the monopoly of essential service sectors, all bear the shadow of extractive institutions. It reminds us that the war between extractive and inclusive institutions never ends. It happens daily, in every bill, in every personnel appointment. So how do we escape this curse? How can a nation break the chains of history to transform itself? The answer lies in rare historical moments that AJR calls critical junctures. In the next part, we will explore the nudge needed to overthrow the old order. And a warning, it usually comes with a crisis.
If I told you that one of the greatest benefactors creating Western democracy and prosperity was the bubonic plague, would you believe it? In 1346, the Black Death swept through Europe, killing nearly half the population. Bodies piled up, society fell into chaos. It was hell on earth. But Echemoglu, Johnson, and Robinson, AJR, saw a glimmer of light in those ashes. Before the pandemic, European peasants were serfs, bound to the Lord's land, living lives of slavery.
After the pandemic, half the population vanished. Suddenly, labor became excruciatingly scarce. Lords frantically sought people to till the fields. Peasants in Western Europe realized their new leverage. They said, "You want me to work? Pay me higher wages and stop the oppression, or I'll go work for the Lord next door." The balance of power shifted. Feudalism collapsed. The seeds of a free labor market and inclusive institutions began to sprout. But wait, the same pandemic swept through Eastern Europe. But why over there did lords collude to suppress peasants even harder, creating a harsher second serfdom? Why did the same event lead to two opposite outcomes, one rising to liberty, the other sinking deeper into slavery? Welcome to the chilling, yet hopeful concept, critical junctures.
History does not move in a straight line. It moves through long periods of stability, where institutions are very hard to change, and then suddenly crashes into a crossroads. These are critical junctures: the French Revolution, pandemics, world wars, or the fall of the Soviet Union. At these moments, the cement of society loosens. Even a tiny initial difference can push a nation down a completely divergent path, creating a massive wealth gap hundreds of years later. In Western Europe, peasants had a tiny bit of pre-existing organizational power before the pandemic. That tiny bit was enough for them to seize the opportunity when the crisis hit. In Eastern Europe, lords were slightly stronger, peasants slightly weaker. When the crisis hit, the lords used that strength to tighten the shackles. The lesson for you: don't wait for things to be stable to find opportunity. Crises, like COVID-19 or the current rise of AI, are when the old orders are loosest. That is when critical junctures appear in your own career and assets. Fate is not determined by the event, but by how you positioned yourself before the event occurred.
After nations fail, Darren Acemoglu and James Robinson released another masterpiece titled The Narrow Corridor. This is the final puzzle piece to understanding their Nobel Prize. They ask, where do liberty and prosperity come from? Many think we need a very strong state, like China, to build infrastructure and keep order. Others think we need a weaker state so the private sector can trade freely. Libertarian view. If the state is too strong and society too weak, you have a despotic leviathan. The state does whatever it wants. You lose liberty. If society is too strong and the state too weak, you have chaos, absent leviathan. Think of tribes in Yemen or Somalia. No one taxes you, but there are no roads, no laws. You are ruled by harsh tribal norms. Prosperity lies only in a very narrow sliver in the middle, where these two forces balance and check each other. They call this the shackled leviathan. We need the monster, the state, to protect security and enforce contracts. But we also need to chain it so it doesn't eat us. This struggle never ends. It is like the Red Queen effect. As the state grows stronger, surveillance cameras, AI, society must also grow stronger. Data protection laws, oversight rights, to maintain the balance. If you stop running, you will be pushed out of the corridor, falling into despotism or chaos.
This is where the story becomes terrifying for our generation. We are standing before a new critical juncture: AI. Through AJR's lens, AI is an extremely dangerous technology for the balance of the narrow corridor. Why? 1. It grants immense power to the state. The ability for mass surveillance, facial recognition, social scoring. The Leviathan is growing new claws. 2. It grants power to the tech elite. Algorithms shape thoughts, manipulate consumer behavior and voters. If civil society is not strong enough to create laws controlling AI, we will be pushed out of the corridor. We could fall into a world where extractive institutions return under a high-tech guise. A small group holding the algorithms and the other 99% becoming digital serfs, working to provide data, but having no say in their own destiny. You see, the 2024 Nobel Prize isn't about the past. It's warning about your own future. Are we repeating the mistake of 14th century Eastern Europe? Will we let the tech crisis turn us into a new type of slave? Or will we use it to break chains like the Western European peasants? The answer lies in the final part, where we will face the truth that nothing is inevitable.
We often make a fatal mistake. We believe that prosperity, freedom, and democracy are the default. We think that human society naturally progresses forward, that tomorrow will be better than today. But AJR have poured a bucket of cold water on that naive optimism. Throughout 10,000 years of human history, poverty and oppression were the default. The prosperity and freedom we enjoy or aspire to is a rare exception, a lucky historical accident that humans had to bleed to secure. And the scariest part? It can disappear at any moment. Look at Venezuela, once the richest country in South America in the 1970s with a functioning democracy. But just a few changes in the rules of the game, a few slips out of the narrow corridor, and now it is one of the most destitute places. The reversal of fortune didn't just happen in 1500. It can happen in 2025, 2030, to your own country, to your own wallet.
The final and most powerful message of the 2024 Nobel Prize is not despair, but a steely call to action. If the fate of nations is not decided by God, nor by genetics, but by institutions, then the good news is institutions are made by people. And because people made them, people can change them. We are not helpless victims of history. We are its authors. Every time you speak up against an unfair regulation at work, every time you support a transparent business over a crony one, every time you participate in community activities to monitor public power, you are pushing the walls of the narrow corridor a little wider, keeping the Leviathan monster from devouring society. Prosperity does not come from the benevolence of a genius leader. It comes from the continuous, persistent struggle of millions of ordinary people to ensure the rules of the game are not turned into tools of extraction by the few.
Why does this Nobel Prize matter to your personal life? Because it explains why you feel tired. Living in a society trying to transition from extractive to inclusive institutions is an exhausting battle. You face corruption, interest groups, and injustice. Sometimes you want to give up. You want to say, whatever, I'll just worry about making money for my family, let politics and society be. But AJR warns, apathy is the food of extractive institutions. When you retreat into your personal shell, you cede the playing field to those who wish to re-establish a feudal order. And when the rules of the game change for the worse, no matter how much money you make, it will be eroded by inflation, by instability, or confiscated by the powerful. There is no sustainable personal wealth in a failing nation.
Scientists Darren Acemoglu, Simon Johnson, and James Robinson were honored not because they found a magic pill to cure poverty. They were honored because they gave us a map showing that poverty is a design trap. Prosperity is a political choice, and the key to escaping poverty lies not in foreign aid or natural resources, but in building institutions that are inclusive, that share power, and that respect the creativity of every individual. The war between extraction and inclusion is raging out there, and whether you like it or not, you are part of that war. Will you be the one who resigns to be swept away by the currents of history, or will you be a small nudge at the critical juncture? The answer belongs to you.